Now it's time to look at maybe my favorite artist of the entire semester, Johannes Vermeer of Delft. Now, Vermeer is an interesting study. He only lived from 1632 to 1675, and he only created about 30 to 35 paintings over the course of his lifetime. So when you consider that we're going to look at 20 plus images here, you're going to see a ridiculous proportion of this artist's work compared to, say, what you saw with Rembrandt. In my opinion, Vermeer is the greatest realist of all time. Now, I'm not saying he's the greatest painter of all time, but I think he's the greatest realist painter of all time for reasons that we will explore in this slideshow. This is an early work by Vermeer. It's Christ in the house of Martha and Mary. And it's what we might characterize as a student work by Vermeer. Vermeer is a very unusual study in that he did not do any drawings, didn't do any preparatory work apparently, just went straight to the painting. He was living in Delft in Holland in a Protestant area and married a Catholic woman. And some people think that may be the reason why he didn't have any more success than he did commission-wise, because it's largely a Protestant situation at that time. Now, in this particular painting, an early one, he works rather large, and we'll find that that's not generally the case for Vermeer's work. Now, there are a couple of areas that I'd like you to direct your attention to in this painting that give some indication as where his future strengths are going to lie. One is the beautiful face at the top of the painting. It's just exquisitely handled. The seated figure in the foreground, look to her left and look at the way the tapestry is handled. That's a little hint as to what's to come with this great artist. And then the fabulous paint handling of the hands. The hands are very beautifully painted, and that's something that Vermeer handles exceedingly well. Now, maybe of lesser strength in this painting are the arms of Christ. The right arm that's extended forward seems a little too short almost, and then the left arm that's bent would seem to indicate that it's extremely long at the same time. So we'll just write this off as being sort of a student work by Vermeer, one that deals with a religious theme which will be unusual for him, and move on. This fabulous painting is called The Little Street, and it introduces the first of three important factors in Vermeer's mature style. And that first factor, or that first key trait for Vermeer, is the issue of texture. Vermeer handles texture better than perhaps any other artist in all of art history. You look at the way the bricks are painted, you look at the way the sky is painted, you look at the way the foliage is painted, and they're all handled in a very different fashion. Even the cobblestones in the street. And that's a very important factor for a realist painter. You can't use the same brushstroke to describe flesh, clothing, hair. You've got to come up with a different brushstroke for each, and there seems to be no end to the types of brushstrokes that Vermeer can come up with. Now, one thing that I want you to know about Vermeer's work is that most of the paintings are very small. This one is only about 16 by 20 inches. I think you'll find that all the more amazing when you look at the next slide, which is a detail from this painting. Look at these details of the bricks on the right and then the women working on the left. Tremendous, tremendous work. If you go back and look at the previous slide, you can also see how Vermeer uses slightly different colors on all of the paint shutters to indicate that they've aged differently, and he's very keenly observant. He's not willing to just put down this color for shutters, this color for brick, and so on. There's a wonderful variety to this painting. This may be a painting that you've seen before. It seems to be widely reproduced in all sorts of texts, and it's called The Milkmaid. This is what we call a genre painting, G-E-N-R-E. And a genre painting is a painting that celebrates a theme from everyday life. In The Milkmaid, we see the woman identified as the maid simply by the way she's dressed. It's a coarse material as opposed to the fine material that we'll see other figures wear in Vermeer's paintings. Again, there's a great abundance of textures through the painting. The baskets hanging on the wall, the milk pouring, the bread that you see in the foreground, even the wall itself. Even her face, it looks like maybe she's had a recent bout with the chicken pox. Great, great, great textures, but to this painting he adds the second key trait of his mature style, and that second key trait is light. Look at the way the light floods in from the window on the left and falls across the figure and makes her seem very round and volumetric. It's a solid three-dimensional figure that is very different from the previous slide in that one was kind of flat and you couldn't tell exactly what time of day it was. Here it's very clear where the light's coming from and how solid that it makes that figure. I love the detail of the milk pouring. I can't imagine trying to paint milk and not just have it look like a glob of white paint. And then below that, you see the object that lies on the floor in the background. And it's a little hard to tell what it is, but I think most people have assessed that to be a foot warmer, where you'd put some coals in and let the warm air rise and warm your feet a bit. Here we have two paintings that were quite possibly, even probably, joined at one point in time. And what we have on the left is a painting called The Geographer, and on the right we have a painting called The Astronomer. And if these two were joined, they would form what's called a diptych. That's a two-paneled painting, a diptych. D-I-P-T-Y-C-H. I like on the left one where Vermeer signs his name. You've got it up on the wall. On the left one, on the left one it's on the wall. On the right one, I think it's actually signed on the cabinet back there, kind of hidden in the shadows a little bit. A rather inventive way to place your signature. These paintings show you how effectively Vermeer uses that great color, texture, and light. And color is our third key element to his mature style. The painting on the left, The Geographer, you see how beautiful the blue is in that painting. Everything else is very warm, and then you've got the vibrant blue of his robe striking a focal point for the painting. I would like to say about both of the paintings. The one features the globe of the stars on the right, and then you see the globe on top of the cabinet in the painting on the left. Vermeer painted these globes with such accuracy that when we go back and study these antique globes, we can tell exactly what edition of the globe Vermeer used as his model in his still life. Again, in this painting called The Music Lesson, you see just how great the color, light, and texture are. Tremendous painting. Tremendous perspective in this painting, the way he draws you back into the space. Now, I want to look at the detail in just a moment and talk a little bit about what's so exciting about a Vermeer. But I want you to look around this painting a little bit and take in all the things. Notice the white vase on the table. What purpose do you think that serves? It's there to create space. If you hold your finger up and block that off, you'll see that the entire right side of the painting collapses and that it doesn't have such great space to it. Now, some people might argue that Vermeer just almost seems to be a human camera. I mean, he takes in everything. It's tremendous. I would like to argue that he's much more than a camera because he makes numerous changes as he makes his paintings. For instance, that vase was once farther to the left, obscuring the man. He moves it to the right and gets it out of the way. By studying this painting, we can ascertain that he actually changed the pattern of the floor. Do you think he laid a new marble floor? I don't think so. He changes it to suit his painting. So he's completely in control of what's going on here. Now, as you look around, you'll find that there are other little hints as to changes that took place. If you look above the woman's head in the mirror, you'll see a very interesting thing at the very top of the mirror. You'll see the reflection of the bottom of Vermeer's easel. And in that case, it almost functions as a signature here. When you look at the mirror, you'll notice, for instance, that the chair is not there in the mirror, and I think he deliberately leaves it out to draw our attention to what's going on in the mirror. Look at the woman's head and compare it from the mirror to her place in the actual space there. And you'll see that her head is turned more toward the teacher, while in the room she's turned more to the instrument. This instrument's called the virginals, and it's sort of like an antique harpsichord. So the question is, what is she really interested in here? Is she interested in music, or is she interested in the teacher? This painting is not so much about music as it is about love. This painting is about love. Now, do you think the teacher's interested in her? In this case, we can say yes quite clearly because of the presence of a second musical instrument in the painting. You see the cello laying on the floor there. In Vermeer's time, if you had one musical instrument in a painting, it would symbolize love. If you had two, it symbolized some sort of a union. This detail shows you what I find most arresting about Vermeer's work. When you look at the tapestries that he has in these paintings, they are so real that you believe that if you were to reach out and touch one of these paintings, you wouldn't feel oil on canvas, but that you would feel that actual wool tapestry. At the same time, you can kind of shake your head, step back, and realize and recognize that it's just brushstrokes on a canvas. It is truly magical with Vermeer. In this detail, you get a better sense of the way her head is turned and the fact that you can't see the chair there in the reflection. So he leaves the chair out, draws your attention to her face, and lets you make that little discovery about the relationship between these two figures. What we're talking about now with these paintings is the iconography of the painting. And iconography basically boils down to one word: symbolism. People, places, things in these paintings symbolize other ideas. This painting is called The Concert, and it has a rather sad story to it, in that I think around 1985, maybe a little later, it was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston, Massachusetts, and has not been recovered yet. Thieves broke into the museum, overpowered the guards, took a knife and used the frame as a guide and cut the painting out of the frame, rolled it up, and took off. And they indeed did get away with it. Now, this one's called The Concert. And you might look at it for a second and see if you can come up with a story based on this image, considering what we just discovered about the music lesson. There are three people here. That immediately makes for a more interesting or confusing issue. Now, what gave us a sense that there was some sort of union between the figures in the previous painting? The fact that there were two musical instruments. How many do we have here? The lady seated at the virginals, 1. 2, the cello on the floor. 3, looks like maybe a lute or violin on the table. 4, he's playing a lute. You can see just to his left shoulder where the handle comes out and his hand is on there. You could even say 5 if you counted the music that the young woman is holding to the right. Now, 1 is love, 2 is a union, 3 must be a ménage à trois, and 4 must be an outright orgy. Now, does it sound like I've lost my mind here, suggesting that this rather sedate-looking painting is suggestive of an orgy? Well, let's move on to the next slide and see if I can't convince you. The top right image here is a detail of the background of Vermeer's painting, The Concert, and you can just barely make out 3 figures. And those 3 figures are from the painting on the left, a painting by Dirk van Baburen. Now, Baburen was an artist who Vermeer bought and sold his paintings. Vermeer also worked as an art dealer, it seems. And in Baburen's painting, the meaning of the painting is quite clear. The young woman, who's rather provocatively dressed at the left, is holding a musical instrument. What does that symbolize? Love. The man in the center seems to be quite preoccupied with this notion of love, but the old woman to the right is pointing to her palm. She expects to be paid. And if you look in the man's hand, right below his face, you'll see he's fixing to drop a coin into the old woman's hands. This painting is called The Procuress. It is a scene of prostitution, and it is not an accident that Vermeer puts it in the background of his painting. In case you're still resistant toward this idea of musical instruments symbolizing love, look at the painting in the background of this lady at the virginals. The woman herself seems distracted. Cupid seems to know exactly what's going on here. This is one of Vermeer's crazier compositions, but one of his more intriguing stories. This is called Woman Interrupted at Her Music. Now you look at the lady of the house. She's been playing music. You get the idea that her mind's not so much on music as it is on love. What has she been interrupted by? The maid. And what has the maid handed her? A letter. Does she seem pleased to receive this letter, or does she seem startled? I think she certainly seems startled. Now look at the maid. Does she seem reluctant to deliver the letter, or is she enjoying delivering this news? What kind of letter is it? Well, it's probably not Dear John, but I think it certainly is Dear Jane. And look at the painting in the background. Behind the maid's head is a ship setting off to sea, as in see you later. So a crazy composition. It looks like it's painted from inside a closet or something, and an equally crazy story. This painting is basically the same theme as the previous one. You can certainly see the trepidation in the woman on the right as she's about to receive the letter. This time the maid doesn't look like she's quite so happy about delivering the bad news, but she's delivering it nonetheless. So this one's a little more subtle, doesn't quite slap you in the face like the previous painting did. The detail shows the brilliant use of selective focus on the part of Vermeer. Look at how crisp and clean the edges on the letter are, and then look at how everything in the foreground and the background are slightly out of focus, slightly blurred. So where does that direct our attention? To the letter itself. This one's called Girl Asleep. And the presumption here is that not only is she asleep, but that she's drunk. Now look, there's 2 seats at the table. Dinner's been laid out. How many people are at the table? There's but one. What else is on the table beside food? There appears to be a jug of wine. Now, if you fixed a fabulous meal for your loved one and they didn't show up, you might have a few drinks yourself. What's interesting about this painting is what Vermeer left out. We talked earlier about his changing the marble pattern on the floor. How did we know that? We used a modern technology to examine an old painting. You can x-ray these paintings. And when you x-ray them, you can look at layers of paint that are beneath the surface. And when we x-ray this one, in the background, we found a man walking through the background quietly. We also saw a dog back there. I would challenge you to even tell me what the dog's name is. And I would tell you that I think it's Fido. Now, where does that dog name come from? It comes from the term fidelity. Has the man been true? I think not. Does she have reason to wake up angry? I think so. This is one of the most exquisite paintings of all of Vermeer's career. It's entitled Woman Holding a Balance. And in this painting, the iconography is used to great effect. It's very simple, but it's very, very effective. Now, in Woman Holding a Balance, you see her holding the scales there, and it may be a little difficult to see, but you'll be able to see them quite clearly in the next slide that shows some details. Now, when you balance something, you're weighing things. Now, besides tangible things, what else can you weigh? You can weigh options. So the balance represents the notion that she is trying to make a decision. Now, the painting in the background here that's so dark and nearly impossible to see is of Judgment Day. Okay? And so that tells us that she's not just making any old decision, but that she's making a moral decision. You look at the jewelry on the table. She's not weighing it. The scales are empty. She's not touching it. She doesn't seem preoccupied by it. The jewelry on the table represents the temptation of the material world. She's ignoring it, leading us to believe perhaps she'll make the right decision. And then in the mirror on the wall opposite her on the wall opposite her face is a mirror, and that tells us that she's looking within to make the decision. So all of these things add up to the fact that she's trying to make a moral decision. Hopefully she's going to make the right one. And let's look at the details and see what this painting looks like a little better. Now you can see the balance quite clearly here. You can also see the exquisite face that I think harkens back to the Christ in the house of Martha and Mary that we looked at earlier. This is Vermeer's absolute masterpiece. On an earlier lecture, I told you that Velázquez's Las Meninas had been named by a panel to be maybe the greatest painting ever done. I would have to argue that this is it. This is the greatest painting ever done. This is called an allegory of painting or the art of painting. What Vermeer does here is present an artist in his studio, and he tells you the story of painting. An allegory is a story in which iconography is used, and it's often used to teach a lesson. Now, pay particular attention here, and I'll tell you about every single thing in the painting. First off, look at Vermeer's trademark, the drapery in the foreground. How does it differ in this painting? Well, it's pulled back. So it represents a stage. He's like saying, these are my actors, and I'm going to tell you a story, or here's a play I want you to pay attention to. Secondly, look at the artist's studio. Do you think my studio has marble floors and a chandelier? I don't think so. So what he's telling you is that painting is an honorable profession. When I paint, do you think I put on my Sunday finest, as the artist appears to be wearing in this picture? No. The artist is dressed in this way to indicate that he is a respected member of society. In the background of many of Vermeer's paintings, we've seen other paintings that have helped us understand the meaning. In this case, what we have is a map on the wall, and that illustrates the then common idea that Vermeer, or the artist, would bring fame and fortune to his country, and specifically to the cities in which he lived, through his works. And notice that the artist in this painting is facing away from us. That's so that we see him as representing all artists, not just one. Now, when will this fame and fortune occur? After his death. That's symbolized by the mask on the table. It's a death mask. What have we got left now? The woman in the background. She's holding a musical instrument, which in this case does not indicate love. The book is more important. The book represents a subject you still have to study in college today. She is Clio, C-L-I-O, the Greek muse for history. What Vermeer's saying by including her in this painting as the subject is that paintings that deal with historical themes are the grandest forms of art. So overall, the meaning of this painting is that painting is important. Now, there are secondary meanings in the painting. The instrument could symbolize music, the mask could symbolize theater, the open book on the table could symbolize literature, and Vermeer is saying that painting is grander than all of these other art forms. It's a really loaded composition and a very, very moving painting to see. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, wow, he's told us about all this symbolism. How do I know he isn't just a raving lunatic making all of this up to amuse himself? Well, one place you can look is in a book by Cesar Ripa called Iconologia. It was originally written in Italian. It was translated into Vermeer's language during his lifetime, and it was used by Vermeer and many other artists and writers as a way of understanding iconography, and it helped them figure out how to personify different ideas. When you look at the figure of Cleo in this painting, she is dressed exactly as described by Cesar Ripa. Is that an accident? No. This happens throughout many of Vermeer's paintings, and other artists used this same book as a reference and used it to create some great works of art, albeit ones that maybe didn't quite measure up to Vermeer's. You can see the edge of the map in this painting also in the detail, and you see the little city views that show up quite nicely, and some tremendous work on the chandelier. The frame of the map in the background that you see behind the chandelier is where Vermeer chose to sign this particular painting, his absolute masterpiece. We go now to Vermeer's great failure. Now, why would I call this a failure? It looks like a pretty good painting, and it's called Allegory of the Faith. The reason I call this a failure has to do with partly with the fact that you don't need me to explain it, do you? The symbols throughout this thing are quite clear. You've got the cup on the table. Is that her Diet Coke, or does that represent the blood of Christ? I think you know the answer. The crucifix is so important, you don't just have it once, you've got it twice. Is that just the latest mystery novel that she's reading, or is it the book, which means the word? I think you know the answer there. And in the foreground, you may be able to see a crushed snake and an apple with a bite taken out of it. How about that? So Allegory of the Faith, I find to be a failure for two reasons. One, you don't need anybody to explain it to you. It's all quite clear. In fact, it's too clear. Secondly, the problem with this has to do with how it compares to the previous two paintings we've studied. In The Woman Holding a Balance, imagine you walk into a room and you see a woman like that. Do you say, "Hi, how you doing? What's going on?" Or do you realize that you've intruded and back quietly out of the room? I think the latter. With the Allegory of Painting, you walk in, you see an artist painting, you might sit down and watch for a little while and then eventually maybe even venture a comment. But when you walk into this room and you see a woman clutching her breast with all this paraphernalia around her and her foot on a globe and a crushed snake in the foreground, you probably run away screaming. Vermeer's a great realist, but there is no intrinsic reality to this painting. Here are some details from the painting. You can see the bottom right, the crushed snake, and the snake's crushed by a stone. Well, what is the foundation of the church? Christ. So there he's referenced once again. On the left detail, you see the woman with her foot on the globe and her skirt half covering the globe. That is supposed to represent the idea that the Catholic faith is spreading across the world. And in the top right, you see the detail of the glass sphere that's hanging in the room. That is supposed to represent the ability of the human mind to contain the vastness of the belief in God. So quite a bit of symbolism here, not quite as successful as it was in the Allegory of Painting. This exquisite painting is called The Lace Maker, and it is smaller than the paper you're taking notes on right now. It's something like 8 by 10 inches. Unbelievable detail crammed into a very small area. Look at the texture of the canvas. I mean, it just comes through. And then look between her hands in that detail, and you see the individual threads. It's amazing the way Vermeer is able to work on such a small scale and create such exquisite paintings. My theory, that has been published indeed, is that Vermeer was a time-traveling space alien who was able to shrink himself while he painted to save money on supplies. This is The Girl with a Pearl Earring, and it shows Vermeer's incredible skill as an oil painter. Look at the way the paint is modeled across her face, the exquisite blending from light to dark. Now, Vermeer used glazes, which are thin applications of paint. For instance, to paint her blue turban, he would have gone in with light and dark and painted it, let it dry, and then just come with a blue wash over the entire thing to let that shadow and light show through. Exquisite painting, a painting that is the subject of a historical novel and more recently a movie, The Girl with a Pearl Earring. This is Vermeer's famous view of Delft, and in this particular painting, many have used it as a springboard to understanding the fact that Vermeer used the camera obscura as an aid to creating and composing his paintings. The camera obscura is basically a pinhole camera, the ancestor of the pinhole camera, that allowed artists to look at what they were going to paint and study it. The problem for would-be photographers in the middle of the 17th century is that there was no film and no paper and no way to capture the image. So Vermeer used it to look at the image and decide how he was going to frame and compose his paintings, and then created his paintings by hand. This detail, with the little sort of circles of confusion, the little highlighted dots throughout it, gives strong credence to the theory that Vermeer used the camera obscura, and he was great friends with a man that was very interested in optics at that time. This is Vermeer's Girl with the Red Hat. Imaginative title, wouldn't you say? It too gives strong credence to the theory that he worked with the camera obscura, something that's done and that is shown in an imaginative fashion in that movie Girl with a Pearl Earring. Now, look at the blues on her shoulder. If you look closely, you'll see little dots. And those little dots and those strong highlights on her face and the lions' heads are exactly what things look like in an unfocused camera image. Now, Vermeer keeps the values throughout this painting very close together, and what does that make really stand out? That exquisite red on the hat. Tremendous, tremendous painting. Another very small painting, something like 8 by 9 inches, and it's unusual in that it's done on wood. This painting's in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., as is the next one. This one's called Girl with the Chinese Hat, or Girl with the Flute, and the National Gallery owns the painting, and they have recently de-attributed it, meaning they no longer believe certainly that it was done by Vermeer. There are a lot of odd things in this painting. You look at the stripes on the hat. There's no way they could run that way. You look at the color in her neck. Ooh, she looks like she's dead almost. There's also a line along there, like her head's been cut off and put back on. Look at the modeling and compare it to the modeling in the previous paintings of the face, the beautiful transitions from light to shadow. They're not beautiful here. They're very abrupt. The white on the garment seems almost dirty compared to the glistening colors that we saw in the previous painting. The composition is odd, the way the hands are cut off, even the hat. All in all, not a very strong effort. Could it be a modern forgery? Perhaps. Could it be someone familiar with Vermeer from his time? Perhaps, although Vermeer had no known teacher and left behind no known students or drawings. He's called the Sphinx of Delft. We don't know much about him, but boy, do we want to know more about him. And the more we want to believe something, the more dangerous things become, and we'll see that in the following slide. These two hideous paintings were actually passed off as Vermeer's in the 20th century. The one on the left is the Last Supper. The one on the right is Christ and the Adulteress. Now, the one on the left, a man named Hans von Meegeren painted it, and he decided to paint it and put it off as a early Vermeer, like the Christ in the House that we looked at. A painting that Vermeer might have gotten to, but not one like his later styles that would have been too easy to recognize as a fake. Well, Hans von Meegeren came forward with this painting and showed it as a Vermeer, said he was acting upon for a family that had had it for generations, and went to sell it, and he sold it for something like $400,000. Well, his initial plan was to sell the painting, have it attributed to Vermeer, and then say, you have validated my genius because Vermeer didn't paint it, I did, right here in the 20th century. Well, he does the painting, he gets the money, and he decides this is a pretty good business, and so he cranks a few more out, including Christ and the Adulteress. Well, Christ and the Adulteress was bought by Marshal Goering, one of Hitler's right-hand men, and the Dutch people were so horrified that a national treasure had fallen into the hands of the Nazis that there was this huge public outcry. The police come to von Meegeren's door to question him about selling this painting. Well, he thinks they figured him out. And so the police come to the door, and before they can say anything, he confesses. The funny thing about this story is that they don't believe him. And von Meegeren may be the only man in history who was forced not to prove his own innocence, but his own guilt at his own trial. Well, that concludes our look at Vermeer. I hope you like his work as much as I do. He's one of my favorites from all of this semester.